The wagon had one broken wheel, $3 to her name, and a baby on the way, and Inez Donnelly had decided that none of that was going to kill her. She sat on the roadside outside of Caldwell, Kansas, in the autumn of 1878, her dark hair plastered to her cheek by the first real cold rain the season had thrown at the plains. The wagon listed hard to the right where the rear wheel had shattered against a half-buried rock in the dark. She had been traveling since before dawn, trying to make distance while the ground was still hard, and she had made exactly 4 miles before the land had taken the wheel clean off its axle. Now the horse, a roan mare named Biscuit who had seen better decades, stood with her head drooping against the rein and regarded Inez with the sort of look that suggested she, too, was done with optimism. Inez pressed one hand to her belly. 5 months along, maybe closer to 6, and she could feel the child shifting low and restless, as though the baby was aware that things had gone sideways in a fairly literal sense. She breathed slowly, methodically, the way her mother had taught her to do when the world tried to convince you it had the upper hand. She was 26 years old. She had been widowed for 7 weeks. Her husband, Patrick Donnelly, had died of a fever he had caught in a cattle camp near Dodge City, and he had left her with a small piece of paper listing a debt she did not fully understand, a wedding ring she still wore out of pure stubbornness, and the knowledge that she had no family within 400 miles. She was heading toward her aunt's house in a town called Mercy Flats, which was 2 days east, and she had been managing just fine until she had not been managing at all. The rain picked up. Inez pulled her shawl tighter, tucked her chin, and began to think very hard about practical matters, because practical matters were the only kind she could afford right now. She did not hear the horse until it was close. It came up the road from the north, moving at a steady trot, and she turned to look with the careful, measured caution of a woman traveling alone in 1878, who had learned that wariness was not paranoia but simple arithmetic. She kept her expression neutral and her hand near the small folding knife she kept in her skirt pocket. The rider pulled up about 20 feet away and stopped. He was tall in the saddle, which was the first thing she noticed. The second thing she noticed was that he did not immediately ride closer, which she appreciated. He sat his horse, a big, dark bay with a blaze down its nose, and looked at the listing wagon, the soaked mare, and Inez herself with the kind of assessment that was direct without being rude. "That wheel is not coming back," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, like someone who had decided long ago that the world would wait for him to finish a sentence. "I know that," Inez said. "I was the one who lost it." A corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was adjacent to one. He swung down from his horse in a single fluid motion and led the bay a few steps closer, stopping at a respectful distance. Up close, she could see him more clearly in the gray light. He was somewhere in his early 30s, with a lean, weathered face and dark eyes that held more thought in them than his measured speech suggested. He wore a battered brown hat that had been through a great deal of weather, a canvas coat gone dark with rain, and the kind of worn, practical clothes that said working man more plainly than any calling card. "Harlan Dunlap," he said, and touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat in that economical greeting that men in Kansas used when they were being polite. "As Donnelly," she said, and watched him register the lack of a Mr. in front of the name and the ring on her finger and the visible roundness of her belly, all in a single quiet glance that made no judgments she could detect. "Where are you headed, Mrs. Donnelly?" "Mercy Flats. My aunt lives there. I have been managing the journey in stages." "That is 2 days of hard riding from here, more with a wagon." He looked at the broken wheel again. "You are going to need a new rear wheel before you go anywhere. Blacksmith in Caldwell could do it, but that is 4 miles back, and that road is getting bad. The creek between here and town will be running high by tonight if this keeps up." Inez looked at the sky. It had the particular flat, featureless gray of a sky that had made up its mind to rain for a long time. She thought about her $3. A new wheel would cost more than that. Rim, spokes, felloes. She had watched enough wagon repairs to know the rough cost. She thought about the creek and about sleeping in a leaning wagon in a cold rain, and about the baby shifting restlessly inside her, and she thought about all of it with the careful, unsentimental clarity of someone who has run out of room for dignity. "Is there somewhere closer I could wait out the rain?" she asked. The asking cost her something. She could feel it go. Harlan Dunlap was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the horizon to the north, then back at her. He seemed to be weighing something, and he did it openly without pretense, which she found she respected more than a false show of easy generosity would have given her. "I have a ranch 2 miles north," he said. "Running creek, dry barn, a spare room in the house. I am alone there this season. My hand took work in Dodge for the winter. You are welcome to the room until the rain passes and the road is better. I can take you back to Caldwell myself for the wheel once the creek drops." She studied him. The study was not subtle. She was past the luxury of subtle. He stood very still under the examination and let her do it. "That too," she noted. "You are doing this out of the goodness of your heart," she said, and the way she said it made it a question with an edge. "I am doing it because you are 6 months along on a road that is about to flood, and leaving you here would make me the kind of man I do not want to be," he said. "That is goodness of a fairly practical sort, no strings attached to it." Inez looked at Biscuit. The mare was shivering now, and that settled it. "All right, Mr. Dunlap," she said. "I accept." He helped her hitch Biscuit to his saddle horn, so the mare could be led, and did not have to haul the broken wagon. Then he helped Inez onto his bay, an operation that required a good deal of careful maneuvering, and not a single word from either of them about the ungainliness of it, and they made the 2 miles north in the driving rain. The Dunlap ranch sat in a bend of the creek on the north side, sheltered by a long, low ridge that broke the worst of the Kansas wind. It was not a grand operation. A solid log house, a good barn that was larger than the house, a corral with 3 horses in it, a chicken coop, and a kitchen garden gone brown for the season. Everything was well maintained. The fence posts were straight, and the roof of the barn was tight. These were things Inez noticed the way her father had taught her to notice them, as indicators of character. Harlan Dunlap got Biscuit settled in a dry stall with grain and water, then got Inez herself settled inside the house with a speed and efficiency that suggested he had thought through the logistics before arriving. He made a fire in the main room, showed her the spare room small, clean, with a proper bed and a quilt, and then made coffee without being asked. The coffee was good. She sat at his kitchen table wrapped in a dry blanket he had produced from a chest, and she held the tin cup in both hands and felt the warmth move through her fingers and up her arms, and something in her chest that had been clenched very hard for 7 weeks loosened by precisely 1 notch. "I will pay you for the room," she said. "I have $3. "You keep your $3, Mrs. Donnelly," he said, sitting down across from her with his own cup. "You are going to need them more than I am." She wanted to argue. She was tired enough that the argument did not quite make it out. He read that easily and changed the subject. "Do you know Mercy Flats well?" "I have not been there in 4 years. My Aunt Opal settled there with her second husband when I was living in Missouri. She wrote me after Patrick died." She paused. She had not said his name aloud to a stranger since it happened. It sat oddly in the air. "She offered me a room for as long as I need it." "Opal is a solid name for an aunt," he said. She almost smiled at that. "She is a solid woman, practical. She will know what to do with me." "I expect you know fairly well what to do with yourself," he said, and there was nothing patronizing in it. It was a plain observation, and she felt it like something being handed to her. She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "Are you always this direct, Mr. Dunlap?" "More or less," he said. "I find the other way takes longer and usually ends in the same place." She did not tell him that first night more than she had already told him. She ate the supper he made: salt pork, beans, cornbread, with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had been eating badly for 2 days, thanked him, and went to bed. She slept 10 hours without dreaming and woke up to the sound of rain still falling and the smell of coffee already made. The creek, as Harlan had predicted, was running fast and high. He showed her from the kitchen window, where the usual thin, peaceful waterway was now a brown, running beast 6 feet over its banks, swallowing the low ground between the ranch and the road to Caldwell. "Day or two," he said, setting a plate in front of her. "Eggs this morning and more cornbread. Maybe 3 if it keeps up." "3 days," she said, more to herself than him. "You are welcome to them," he said simply, and sat down across from her with a ledger he was working through, giving every appearance of a man who had already resolved the question and was not going to revisit it. She ate and watched him work through the ledger. His handwriting, she could see from across the table, was careful and precise. He caught her looking and turned the book so she could see it without straining. "Cattle numbers," he said. "I run about 200 head, mostly longhorns with some crossbreeding I have been experimenting with. The crossbreeds are doing better in the winters up here. Hardier." "What cross?" she asked, because she had grown up around cattle in Missouri and the question was reflexive. He looked at her with a new kind of attention. "Hereford," he said. "The red and white ones. Shorter legs, broader body. They put on weight faster and they do not lose it as quick in the cold." She nodded. "My father ran Herefords. He said the Longhorns were better for the drives, but the Herefords were better if you were staying put." "That is exactly right," Harlan said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite surprise but was related to it, the pleased recognition of a person unexpectedly meeting someone who speaks their language. They talked cattle for a good hour, and Inez noticed that the constraint she had felt the night before, the guarded, careful distance of a woman in a stranger's house, had begun to soften around the edges. Not disappear. Soften. The rain kept up through that day and into the next. She made herself useful because sitting still was not something she had ever managed well. She helped him mend a pile of harness leather that needed stitching, took over the cooking on the second morning when he was out in the barn dealing with a horse that had come up lame, and organized the chaos of his pantry into some approximation of logical order. He came in to find his pantry reorganized, and stood in the doorway for a moment with an expression she could not quite read. "I hope that was acceptable," she said, suddenly conscious that she had rearranged another person's kitchen without asking. "It is fine," he said, "more than fine." He was looking at the neatly arranged shelves with the same expression a person uses when they have been living with a problem for so long they have stopped seeing it as a problem. "I have been meaning to do that since last spring." "The flour was next to the lamp oil," she said. "I know," he said. "It worried me every time I saw it." She laughed. It came out before she could weigh it or manage it, a real laugh, not the polite kind, and it surprised both of them. She pressed her hand over her mouth immediately, as though catching it. He smiled. The real kind this time, not the adjacent to a smile she had seen on the road, but a full, genuine one that changed his face considerably and showed a small gap between his 2 front teeth that was somehow the most approachable thing about him. "Do not apologize for laughing, Mrs. Donnelly," he said. She lowered her hand. "Inez," she said, "if you are going to feed me cornbread for 3 days, you might as well call me Inez." "Inez," he said, as though he was testing the weight of it. "Harlan." "I know," she said. "You told me on the road." "I just wanted to make it mutual," he said. She looked at him a moment longer than she meant to. Then she turned back to the pantry to adjust the position of the salt crock, because she needed somewhere to put her eyes that was not his face. On the third morning the rain stopped. The world was soaked and brilliant when they stepped outside. The sky that particular washed blue that only comes after days of rain, the creek still running high but visibly lower than the day before. Harlan walked the low ground toward the road and came back to report that another day would see it passable. "I can ride into Caldwell tomorrow for the wheel," he said. "Or I can take you and the wagon in together, and we can get the wheel fitted properly. It would be faster if you come along because the smithy will want to fit it to your axle." "I will come along," she said. She had been thinking about the journey and about her $3 and about the wheel cost, and she had arrived at an uncomfortable arithmetic. "I want to ask you something," she said before she could think better of it. "All right," he said. "The wheel is going to cost more than I have. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I am going to need—" She stopped. the asking was still hard. It was the kind of hard that did not get easier no matter how many times you did it, but she had learned to do it anyway. I am going to need some help with the cost, and I want to know what you would consider fair repayment. I'm not looking for charity, I am looking for terms. He looked at her steadily. You have been cooking and mending and reorganizing my kitchen for 3 days, he said. That is worth something. That was something I chose to do, she said. That does not count. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have a proposition, but I want you to hear the whole thing before you answer. She crossed her arms over her chest. I am listening. I need help through the winter, he said. Domestic help. My hand is gone until spring, and I have been managing the house badly on my own, as the state of the pantry indicates. The ledger work I can do, the cattle work I can do, but the house end of running a ranch is getting away from me. I am behind on 4 different things that need hands I do not have free. He met her eyes, and his were plain and serious. I am not asking you to stay in Mercy Flats. I understand you have an aunt there who has offered you a place, and I am not trying to replace that. But if you wanted to stay here through the winter, until the baby comes and you are on your feet again, I would give you the room, the board, the wheel, and whatever coin I can spare. In return, you would manage the house. That is the whole proposition. If you say no, I will still take you to Caldwell tomorrow and pay for the wheel myself, and that is the end of it. She stared at him. He had delivered this entirely without embarrassment, without any hidden angle that she could detect, and he had added that last part, the unconditional offer regardless of her answer, with a steadiness that made it feel irrefutable. She thought about Aunt Opal's house in Mercy Flats. 2 small rooms, and a husband who drank friendly on weekdays and less friendly on weekends. Opal had not mentioned that part in her letter, but Inez had heard it from a woman in Dodge who knew someone who knew someone. She had been thinking about Mercy Flats with a kind of calculated hope that she now recognized as partly wishful thinking. She thought about the baby, about the winter coming, about the flat, cold blue sky and the good barn and the solid roof and the man across from her, whose ledger handwriting was careful and precise, and who had let her reorganize his kitchen without complaint, and who had offered her a proposition with the word no built right into it. I want to write to my aunt first, she said. I need to tell her what has happened and where I am. I want her to know. Of course, he said, and I want it to be an honest arrangement, she said. I will work for my keep. I am not someone you need to take care of. I am aware of that, he said. That is not what I am proposing. She looked at him a long moment. All right, Harlan Dunlap, she said. We have a deal. He put out his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief and entirely businesslike, and she was very aware of the warmth of his palm and chose to file that observation away somewhere where she would not have to look at it immediately. They rode into Caldwell the next day, once the creek dropped enough to cross safely. The town was a proper cattle town, wide main street gone muddy from the rain, saloons and a hotel and a general store and a land office, the particular busy, slightly lawless energy of a Kansas cow town in the late 1870s. There were cowboys coming off the trail heading south for the winter, and cattlemen making last-season deals, and the constant ambient noise of a place where a great deal of money was moving through in concentrated bursts. The blacksmith was a man named Howard Galt, broad as a barn door, who looked at the broken wheel Harlan had brought in on the back of the wagon bed and gave a price that was, as Inez had predicted, substantially more than $3. He and Harlan negotiated it down to something reasonable. Inez produced her $3 without being asked and put them on the counter, and Harlan added the rest without comment. While the wheel was being fitted, Harlan took her to the general store and bought provisions: flour, sugar, salt, dried beans, a side of bacon, oats enough to lay in serious stores for a Kansas winter. He also, without announcing what he was doing, steered her toward a shelf of fabric. The spare room does not have curtains, he said, studying the bolts of cloth with the expression of a man who had strayed outside his area of expertise. and it gets cold on the east side in the mornings. I thought maybe you would want something for the window. She looked at the fabric. There was a bolt of dark blue wool, practical and warm, and next to it a printed cotton with small brown flowers on a cream background that was pretty in a careful, unfussy way. The wool would be better for warmth, she said. Get both, he said. The wool for the window and the cotton for whatever else you need it for. She looked at him sharply. He was looking at the oats. Harlan. You are going to need things, he said, still looking at the oats. Baby things before long. The cotton is practical. I am not being sentimental, I am being logical. She was quiet for a moment. She could feel something pressing against the back of her throat that she refused to identify. She took the wool and the cotton off the shelf. Thank you, she said. I will pay you back. You already are, he said, and picked up the oats. They drove back to the ranch with the new wheel and the provisions and the fabric, and by the time they turned down the track toward the house, the light was going gold and low, and the ridge was throwing a long shadow across the pasture, where Harlan's cattle were grazing in the last warmth of the afternoon. Inez sat on the wagon seat and watched the land go past, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time, and did not know what to do with yet. She wrote to Aunt Opal that evening by lamplight. She was honest. She explained about the wheel and the rain and Harlan's offer, and she described him plainly and factually. A cattle rancher, a decent man, a practical arrangement. She said she would write again when the baby came, and that she hoped Opal was well, and that the offer of her room remained open and welcome, but that for now she was where she needed to be. She sealed the letter and looked at it for a long time before she addressed it, because writing it down had made it real in a way that standing in his kitchen had not quite achieved. She was staying. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that surprised her with its ease. She managed the house with the focused competence of a woman who had been running a household since she was 12, and she managed it well. The kitchen became her domain. She baked bread twice a week, kept the fire right, mended the endless procession of things that needed mending, and began, slowly, to make the house feel less like a place that was being endured and more like a place that was being lived in. Harlan moved around her with a consideration that she had not expected and came to rely on. He did not hover. He did not fuss. He treated her as he had said he would, as a capable person doing her share. And when he came in from the cattle work in the evening smelling of cold and hay, he ate what she cooked with genuine appreciation and told her so plainly, which she found she valued a great deal because Patrick had been the sort of man who expected excellent food the way he expected air to breathe, without particular notice. They talked in the evenings. This began to be something she looked forward to, with an honesty that took her by surprise. He had grown up in Missouri, he told her, not so far from where she had grown up, as it turned out, and they discovered a small overlapping geography of hills and rivers and towns that they navigated together with the pleasure of two people finding unexpected common ground. He had come to Kansas at 22 to work cattle on a drive and had never quite made it back. He had worked for other men for 5 years, saving carefully, and had bought his land at 27 and had been building the operation since. "Do you miss Missouri?" she asked one evening. October now, the air outside carrying real cold in it. He thought about this in his characteristic unhurried way. "I miss the trees," he said finally. "Kansas is beautiful, but it is a flat beauty. Missouri has hills. I used to know every hill in a 10-mile radius of where I grew up." "I know exactly what you mean," she said. "I spent the first year in Kansas thinking I had been put in a place where someone had removed all the furniture." He laughed. Genuinely, fully, a low sound that she felt she had earned, and that feeling was entirely too satisfying to examine closely. He asked her about Patrick one night, carefully, the way you ask about something when you have thought about whether to ask and decided to do it honestly rather than dance around it forever. She told him the truth. Patrick Donnelly had been a good man in some ways and a careless one in others. He had loved her in the way he had loved most things, enthusiastically and without much consistency. He had been charming and funny and not particularly reliable, and she had married him at 21 knowing this, and had spent 5 years managing the gap between who he was and what she needed. She had loved him, she said, but she had also been tired of him, and now he was gone and she did not know how to feel about any of it. So mostly she felt the grief and the relief in alternating waves and let them be what they were. Harlan listened to all of this without interrupting or offering consolation, which was the best possible thing he could have done. When she was done, he said, "That sounds like it was complicated." "Yes," she said. "Grief usually is," he said, "when it is mixed up with other things." She looked at him. "You sound like you know." He was quiet for a moment. "I was engaged once," he said, "a long time ago." She decided she would rather have a man with a house already built than a man who was still figuring out where to build it. She was not wrong. It was still hard. "How long ago?" "6 years." "Are you over it?" He considered this with the same seriousness he brought to everything. "I am at peace with it," he said. "That is not quite the same thing, but it is close enough." She nodded. She understood the distinction precisely. November came in hard and cold, the way Kansas Novembers do, with a wind that came down off the plains without anything to stop it for what felt like 1,000 miles. Inez's belly was fully, undeniably large now, and she moved through the house with the careful, deliberate motion of a woman who has accepted that her center of gravity is no longer her own. Harlan had started, without discussion, adjusting small things around the house in ways that made her life easier. The lower shelf in the pantry he cleared and stocked with things she needed daily so she did not have to reach up. He brought in extra wood and stacked it near the kitchen door. He moved the heavy wash basin to a table that was the right height. She did not comment on these adjustments. He did not explain them. They existed as a sort of parallel language between them that neither of them had named. There was a day in mid-November when Inez was making biscuits and dropped the rolling pin, and when she bent to retrieve it, she could not straighten back up properly, her back locking in a hard spasm that left her standing hunched over the counter with her teeth clenched. Harlan came in from outside at that exact moment, read the situation in a single look, crossed to her and put one careful hand on her lower back. "Right here," he said. "Yes," she said through her teeth. He pressed steadily and carefully, not a massage exactly but a firm, knowing pressure, and the spasm began to unlock. She exhaled slowly. "My sister had 4 children," he said by way of explanation. "I helped her through the last 2. Back troubles were a constant feature." She straightened carefully, his hand still resting lightly at her back, ready if she needed it again. "Thank you," she said. He stepped back. Not hurriedly, not with embarrassment, just with the same measured consideration he applied to everything. "Sit down for a minute," he said. "The biscuits can wait." "The biscuits absolutely cannot wait. The dough is ready." "Then I will finish the biscuits," he said, already washing his hands at the basin. "You do not know how to make biscuits." "I am a fast learner," he said. "Tell me what to do," she told him. He listened with focused attention, and rolled out the dough with more competence than she expected, and the resulting biscuits were somewhat irregular in shape but perfectly edible, and she ate 3 of them sitting at the kitchen table while he finished the rolling and cutting. And something about the scene, him in shirt sleeves and her in her chair with her hands finally still for 5 minutes, put a pressure in her chest that she was going to have to deal with sooner or later. She was falling in love with him. She recognized this with the particular wariness of a woman who has been through enough to know that love is not always a gift, that sometimes it arrives at the worst possible time and in the most inconvenient circumstances, and that the feeling itself is not a conclusion, but only a beginning that may or may not lead anywhere worth going. She was 7 months pregnant by another man. She was living in his house on what was essentially a working arrangement. She did not know what he felt about her, and the careful, respectful distance he maintained told her nothing definitive, because Harlan Dunlap maintained that distance with everyone and everything as a matter of character rather than as a signal. She tucked the feeling away and said nothing, but she noticed things. She noticed that when he came in from the cold and she was at the stove, He always seemed to find a task that kept him in the kitchen, which was not the most logical place for a rancher to spend his evenings. She noticed that when she talked, he was fully, completely present in a way that Patrick had rarely managed, his attention steady and total. She noticed that he had started buying small things in town, a jar of honey because she had mentioned once that she preferred honey to molasses in her coffee, a particular kind of thread she had been running low on, a book of poems by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow that appeared on the table one morning with no comment from him whatsoever. She read the poems and left the book on the shelf where it would be easily accessible and did not say anything about it either. The first snow came in late November. She stood on the porch in the early morning and watched the plains go white, the light strange and muffled and beautiful, and she heard the door behind her, and then he was standing beside her, both of them looking out at the snow. "It is lovely," she said. "It is," he agreed. They stood there for a while in the cold, not touching, not talking, just existing in the same space in front of the same silent white world, and Inez thought that this, just this, the standing alongside someone in the cold, was something she had missed more than she had known how to name until it was happening. She had a long conversation with herself that night about being sensible. She was a practical woman. She was living in his house on his charity. However you dressed it up as an arrangement, she was aware of the real shape of it. She had a child coming in 2 months or less. She was not in a position to have feelings about anyone. She listed these facts methodically and told herself to file the feeling away and leave it there. She was not entirely successful. December arrived and the weather closed in properly, the temperature dropping to the kind of cold that was all business. Harlan's cattle operation shifted to winter mode. He was out twice daily breaking ice on the water troughs, moving the weaker calves into the barn, managing the feed stores with the careful calculation of a man who had done this long enough to know exactly what he had and what he needed. Inez, watching him work through the kitchen window, found herself knowing his schedule the way you know the schedule of someone who has become central to your daily life without your quite deciding to let them. She had written again to Aunt Opal, a longer letter this time, more honest. Opal had written back a letter that was brisk and knowing in the way of women who have been around the block enough times to recognize what is happening when they see it described between the lines of a very careful letter. Opal's response said, "You sound well. You sound more well than I expected. I am glad the man has a good roof and a straight fence and that his handwriting is careful. Those things say a great deal. Come to me if you need to. If you do not need to, that is also acceptable." Inez read this letter 3 times and felt a complicated rush of gratitude for her aunt. It was a Saturday evening in mid-December when things shifted. They had been sitting by the fire after supper, which had become their habit. She had been sewing, the baby things she had been making slowly and steadily from the cotton fabric, and he had been reading, and the fire was good, and the house was warm, and the wind was doing its best outside without getting in. She had been telling him somewhat desultorily about the town in Missouri where she had grown up, and he had been listening in that complete way of his, and she had looked up mid-sentence and found him looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. She stopped talking. He did not look away. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice was steady. Everything about him was steady. She had come to think of steadiness as one of his defining qualities, the bedrock under everything else. "All right," she said. He set his book down with deliberate care. "I am aware that the arrangement here is what it is," he said, "and I have tried to respect that. The arrangement, what it means and what it does not mean." Her heart had done something irregular and was now proceeding at a slightly different pace than it had been. "I have not been trying to," he paused, choosing the words with the same care he brought to the ledger. "I have not been trying to take advantage of a situation. I want you to know that. Whatever I feel it is mine to manage. You do not owe me anything on account of it." "Harlan," she said. "I am not finished," he said gently. She waited. "I think you are the most capable and honest and interesting person I have met in a very long time," he said. and I am aware that your situation is complicated and that I am part of that complication by having offered what I offered, and I am not saying any of this to make your life harder. I am saying it because I am not good at carrying things that are not said, and I would rather say it plainly once and then leave it alone than not say it and have it sit between us as something unacknowledged. He met her eyes. I like you, Inez. More than I expected to. More than is probably convenient for either of us right now. That is the whole of it. She sat very still with her hands in her lap and the baby's half-made shirt in her hands. She thought about being sensible. She had been sensible for 7 weeks. She had been sensible her entire adult life. I like you too, she said. More than is convenient, that is also the whole of it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, well, he said. Well, she said. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind pressed against the house and the house held. I am not, she started. I know, he said. There is nothing to do about it right now. I am not asking for anything. I am not proposing anything. I just wanted it to be said. I am glad it was said, she said. He nodded. He picked his book back up. She picked up the needle and thread. They sat like that for another hour, reading and sewing in the firelight, and it was entirely ordinary and also entirely changed. And Inez Donnelly felt, for the first time in a very long time, that the future was something she wanted to walk toward rather than simply survive. The baby came on the 5th of January, 1879. He came 2 weeks early and without particular warning. One morning she woke before dawn with the certain specific knowledge that something was beginning, and she lay still for a moment assessing her own body with the same methodical calm she brought to everything, and then she got up and woke Harlan. He was awake and dressed in under a minute. The doctor in Caldwell, he said, already moving. The creek, she said. He looked out the window. Ice on the ground, hard cold, and the creek between them and Caldwell was frozen in sheets. I can break the ice, he said. In this cold with the baby already coming. By the time you get to Caldwell and back it will be over. She met his eyes. I need a midwife or I need you. He looked at her for 2 seconds. I told you my sister had 4 children, he said. I know, she said. I am counting on it. What followed was the longest 6 hours of Harlan Dunlap's life by a considerable margin, and he managed it the way he managed everything, completely, methodically, and without panic, though Inez, who was watching him from a somewhat closer vantage point than she would have chosen, noticed that his hands shook very slightly at certain moments, and that he talked to her continuously in a low, steady voice that she later thought was as much for his own nerves as for hers. He talked about the ranch, about the cattle, about the Hereford crossbreeds he was planning to expand in the spring. He told her about a particular calf that had been born that October that was already showing exceptional promise. He described in exhaustive detail the improvements he wanted to make to the barn roof come spring. She listened to all of it through the waves of labor and found the specific ordinariness of it deeply comforting. And she thought, between waves, that this was love, the willingness to describe a barn roof in full detail to give someone something steady to hold on to. The baby arrived at 7:10 in the morning in the gray January light, and he was healthy and loud and had a substantial amount of dark hair and the red, furious look of a person who had opinions about his recent journey and wanted everyone to know it. Inez held him against her chest and felt the world rearrange itself around that weight. Harlan was sitting beside the bed, still in shirt sleeves, looking at the baby with an expression that she could only describe as awe, raw, unguarded, completely unconcealed awe. "He is fine," Harlan said. His voice was not entirely steady. It was the first time she had heard it be anything other than steady, and it cracked her open in a new place entirely. "He is," she said. "He is very fine." She named him William Patrick Donnelly. Patrick for his father and William because she had always loved that name, and because she had a right to give her son something she had chosen herself. Harlan, when she told him the name, nodded as though he had expected exactly this level of care and found it exactly right. The weeks after William's birth were a different kind of exhausting than anything that had preceded them, and Harlan managed them with the same undemonstrative thoroughness he brought to everything. He took the night wakings more than once when Inez was too spent to move, and she could hear him through the thin wall of the spare room, walking the baby in the main room, talking to him in that low, steady voice the same way he had talked her through the labor, narrating whatever was in his head, the ranch, the weather, the qualities of various horses. And William, who was a baby of strong preferences, seemed to find Harlan Dunlap's voice as reliable and steadying as his mother did. February arrived, and with it a letter from Aunt Opal. Opal's husband had died in December. A heart that had been bad for years had finally made its decision, and Opal was now considering a move. Her letter was brisk and matter-of-fact about the death, and after 2 paragraphs she pivoted, with characteristic bluntness, to the real subject. She wrote, "Inez, I have been reading your letters since November, and I am going to say something direct because I am old enough to dispense with the long way around. It sounds to me like you have found a decent man who wants to be good to you and your boy, and that you have some feelings about him that are keeping you cautious on account of Patrick. Patrick was Patrick, and he is gone, and whatever you owe him is paid. You do not owe a dead man your caution. The question is whether the living man is worth it. From what you have described, he sounds like he might be. I am not saying be reckless. I am saying that sometimes the thing that looks like shelter is actually a whole life, and you will not know until you decide to find out." Inez read this letter at the kitchen table while William slept and Harlan was out with the cattle, and she read it 3 times, and then she folded it and sat with it for a long time. She thought about the night in December by the fire. She thought about the biscuits, and the back spasm, and the honey in her coffee, and the book of poems that had appeared without comment. She thought about his voice through the wall in the night, steady and low and constant, talking her son through his wakings. She thought about the way the house had come to feel like hers in some way she had not claimed, and he had not insisted upon, but that existed anyway, in the arrangement of the pantry, and the rhythm of the days, and the particular angle of the lamplight at the kitchen table in the evenings when they sat across from each other, and talked about everything and nothing with the ease of people who have stopped pretending there is no ease there. She thought about her whole life. She was folding the letter when he came in. He came in the way he always did, stamping snow off his boots at the door, hanging his coat and hat, moving to the stove for the coffee she always left ready, and then he turned and saw her face. "What happened?" he said. "Nothing bad," she said. "Opal's husband died in December. She is all right. She wrote me something." She stopped. She looked at him across the kitchen. He was standing with his coffee cup, and his coat was off and his hair was damp from the snow, and he was watching her with that complete, still attention, and she thought, well, there it is. There is the rest of your life if you are brave enough to take it. She said something about shelter, Inez said. About how sometimes a roof is a whole life in disguise. He was very still. "I have been careful," she said. "I have been very careful for a very long time, and I think I have been careful enough." Harlan set his coffee cup down. "I do not know how to do this gracefully," she said. "I am not going to pretend I do. I have a 4-week-old baby and a dead husband, and I am living in your spare room, and I am not sure any of that is the starting point anyone would choose." "No," he said. "But it is the starting point we have." She looked at him. "I love you," she said. The saying of it was simpler than she had expected, plain like everything real. "I have been trying not to, for practical reasons, and I am not very good at it." He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, and he did not do anything dramatic. He did not sweep her off her feet, because she was a sensible woman who had a baby asleep in the next room, and sweeping was not what this moment called for. He put both hands on either side of her face and looked at her with the full weight of everything he was, and then he said, quietly and completely, "I love you too, Inez Donnelly. I have been trying to give you time to get to it yourself." She put her hands over his. He kissed her. It was a kiss that said, "Here is where we have been going all along. Here is the thing that was underneath everything we said and did not say, everything practical and everything unspoken. It was not a hurried kiss. He was not a hurried man. It was the kind of kiss that felt like a door opening into a room that had been there all along. When it ended, she rested her forehead against his, and they stayed like that for a long moment in the kitchen with the snow falling outside and William asleep in the spare room and the coffee going cold on the counter. "What do we do now?" She said. "We get married," he said. "It was not a question. If you will have me, and we raise your boy and we run this ranch and we live here for the rest of our lives if that suits you." "It suits me considerably," she said. "Good," he said, and kissed her again, and this one was less careful and more certain, the way second kisses tend to be. They were married in March of 1879 in the parlor of the Methodist Church in Caldwell, because the weather in March in Kansas was not to be trusted for outdoor ceremonies, and Inez had developed strong views about staying dry. The ceremony was small. The Reverend, his wife, the blacksmith Howard Galt, who had become something of a friend, and a rancher couple from 2 miles down the road named Elbert and Dora Haas, who had brought Inez a side of smoked ham in February and declared themselves invested in her happiness. Aunt Opal arrived by stage 3 days before the wedding, having decided that a trip to Caldwell was entirely feasible for a woman of her age and intentions. She was 61, broad-shouldered and fully opinionated, and she walked into Harlan's house, conducted a thorough inspection of the kitchen, the pantry, the bedroom, and the man himself, and announced her verdict to Inez in the spare room while William slept. "The pantry is excellent," she said. "I organized it," Inez said. "I know you did." "I am complimenting his judgment for letting you." Opal looked at her niece carefully. "He is a serious man." "Yes. Not dull serious, the good kind, the kind that shows up." Opal smoothed her skirt. "Your mother would have liked him." Inez felt that go through her in a wave. "Do you think so? Your mother liked men who were still enough to let a strong woman stand beside them without needing to be smaller." Opal looked at her steadily. "This one is that." She was right. He was exactly that. At the wedding, Harlan held William during the moment when both Inez's hands were needed for the ring exchange. And the baby, who was now 2 months old and had recently discovered that he could produce a variety of impressive sounds, chose this moment to make a noise that caused the Reverend to lose his place and the entire small congregation to dissolve into laughter. And Harlan stood there with the baby on his arm, laughing along with everyone else. And Inez looked at him and thought, this is the whole of it. This is what it is supposed to feel like. She had offered him, she thought, more than she had known she was offering. She had offered him the truth of herself, unvarnished and unsimplified. She had offered him the full complexity of her life, grief and practical $3 arithmetic and a baby and a dead husband and opinions about pantry organization. She had offered him the kind of honesty that makes shelter into something real, the kind that turns a roof into a home. And he had taken all of it, gladly, completely. They drove back to the ranch in the evening light, Opal sitting in the back of the wagon with William, who was investigating her hat with considerable focus, and Inez sitting beside Harlan on the wagon seat with his hand holding hers on top of her knee, and the Kansas spring beginning to push up through the mud and the last gray edges of the winter snow. Spring came properly in April, and with it everything changed in the way that springs on cattle ranches always change everything. The work doubled and tripled, the days lengthened, the land woke up loud and demanding and full of new problems and new possibilities. Harlan's cowhand came back from Dodge, a laconic young man named Deke who showed up one morning, noted the new arrangement in the house with a single blink, said "Congratulations, boss," to Harlan, said "ma'am" to Inez, and went to work without further comment. Harlan had arranged to buy 5 additional Hereford bulls from a rancher east of Caldwell, and the spring was dominated by the integration of these animals into his existing herd, and the managed chaos that always attends ambitious cattle breeding. Inez, who knew more about cattle than most of the people Harlan encountered professionally, became his most useful advisor on this project by simply observing things and stating what she saw without varnish, which was exactly the kind of input he needed. The second bull from the east lot is not going to settle in well with the longhorn cows, she told him one evening, after watching the pasture from the fence for an afternoon. He is too aggressive about establishing dominance. If you leave him in that pasture, he will injure one of the others within the week. Harlan looked at her. What would you do? Separate him for now. Let him see the herd through the fence for 2 weeks. Let him settle, then reintroduce him when he has got used to the idea that he is not in charge of everything immediately. Harlan looked at the pasture. Then he went and moved the bull. Within the week, the bull was calmer. The integration when it happened was smooth. You could have been a rancher, Harlan told her. I am a rancher, she said. I live on a ranch, he grinned. My rancher, he said. Your rancher's wife, she corrected. Both, he said. Both, she agreed. William was growing with the particular enthusiasm of a well-fed, well-loved baby who has decided he enjoys life. By April, he was laughing real laughs, whole-body laughs that started somewhere in his belly and came out like a surprise announcement. And by May, he had developed a furious interest in locomotion and was dragging himself toward things with a determination that Harlan said he recognized. He has your face when he wants something, Harlan told her, watching the baby haul himself toward a particularly interesting boot. What face? The face that says, I have decided this is happening and I am just waiting for the world to cooperate. She thought about this. That is not a face, she said. That is just clarity. Yes, he said, that is what I mean. Summer came and the ranch hummed with the full productive energy of a working cattle operation in its best season. Harlan had a good year. The Hereford crosses were doing exactly what he had hoped, gaining weight steadily, and coming through the summer heat better than the pure longhorns. He sold a portion of his herd in July at Caldwell's end-of-summer market, and came home with enough to pay off the last of a loan he had been carrying since he bought the land 7 years ago. He came in that evening and told her, sitting at the kitchen table with a calmness that could not quite conceal the quiet, profound satisfaction underneath it. Free and clear, he said. The land is free and clear. She reached across the table and took his hand and did not say anything, because some things were complete enough without words. He turned his hand over and held hers. They sat like that for a while, in the kitchen where she had reorganized the pantry and he had made biscuits, and she had first laughed in front of him, and they had sat across from each other in the lamplight on 100 evenings, building this life out of practical things and honest words and the steady accumulation of chosen days. Autumn returned, a full year since the broken wheel on the road outside Caldwell, and Inez stood on the porch on a morning in October with William on her hip and watched the light on the ridge and felt the particular satisfied ache of a person standing inside the life they were meant to be living. Harlan came out and stood beside her and put his arm around her, and William immediately grabbed his father's collar with both fists, which was his current preferred method of greeting. "What are you thinking?" Harlan asked. "I am thinking about how I almost went to Mercy Flats," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "But you did not." "But I did not." She leaned into him. "I am thinking about the wheel." "The wheel," he said. "If it had not broken," she said, "or if it had broken closer to Caldwell, or if the rain had held off another hour, or if a different person had come down that road." "You are thinking about contingency," he said. "I am thinking about how many things had to go wrong to land me here, and how here is the best place I have ever been." He held her a little tighter. William, objecting to the reduction of personal space this created, made a noise of protest and grabbed 2 fistfuls of Harlan's shirt instead, which seemed to satisfy him. "I have something to tell you," Inez said. He looked down at her. She met his eyes. She was watching his face very carefully, the way she had watched him on the road that first day, learning him. She saw the moment he understood. His expression moved through surprise and then something deeper and more open than surprise, something that was entirely unguarded and entirely him. "Are you sure?" he said. "I am sure," she said. "About 2 months, I think. Spring baby." He bent and kissed her temple, her cheek, her hair. William, thoroughly confused by this development, attempted to participate by grabbing at both of their faces simultaneously, which caused them both to laugh into each other in the way that people laugh when something is too good to hold still. "William," Harlan said, extricating his nose from the baby's enthusiastic grip, "you are going to have to learn to share, my friend." William responded to this information with a look of supreme skepticism. November passed quietly, the rhythm of the second autumn familiar now in a way the first had not been. Inez knew this land now, knew the way the light moved across the ridge at each hour of the day, knew the sound the wind made against the north wall versus the east, knew which horses were skittish in cold weather and which were reliable, knew where the creek ran wide and where it narrowed, knew every fence post on the back line. She had grown into this land the way a root grows into soil, gradually and completely. She had also, over the course of the year, done something else she had not entirely planned. She had become known. Caldwell was a small world in the way that all frontier towns were small worlds, and word traveled quickly and thoroughly. There was a particular circuit of women in the county, wives of ranchers and farmers and merchants, who visited each other and talked and helped each other, and formed the actual social fabric of the region, the invisible infrastructure that held frontier life together against the things that tried to take it apart. Inez had been drawn into this world gradually, beginning with Dora Haas from down the road, who had appeared regularly with food and company, and the kind of practical help that acknowledged difficulty without making it shameful. Through Dora she had met others, Ada Kels, whose husband ran the feed store, and Marion Clutter, whose family had a homestead 8 miles north, and a woman named Rosalind Bright who was the teacher at the school outside of town, and who had opinions about education that matched Inez's own with remarkable precision. These women knew things. They knew which families were struggling, and which doctors could be trusted, and where to get the best prices on fabric, and when to bring a casserole, and when to bring a bottle of something stronger. They helped a family named Garza, a Mexican family who had homesteaded west of Caldwell, and faced regular ugly pressure from a neighboring rancher, who did not think they had a right to land, by organizing a series of formal witnesses to their property boundaries that made legal harassment considerably more difficult. This was the kind of thing that happened when capable women had enough trust among themselves to act, and Inez found that her respect for this particular form of power grew the more she understood it. She told Harlan about the Garza situation one evening, describing what she and the other women had done with the property witnesses, and he listened with the focused attention she had come to love and then said, "That was the right thing to do. You do not have opinions about them being Mexican." She said, watching him, "I have opinions about the man who was trying to push them off their land," he said. "They are not favorable opinions. Some people around here would disagree with you." "Some people around here are wrong," he said simply. "Land is land. If they worked it and bought it proper, it is theirs. That is the whole of the law as far as I understand it, and the only version of it that makes any sense." She looked at him. She thought about all the ways the West treated people, the way it treated women alone on roads with broken wagons, the way it treated Mexican families with homesteads, the way it treated the Cheyenne and the Arapaho whose land this had been before any of them arrived, a history that sat beneath all of it like something that would not stay buried because it should not be buried. She thought about how rare it was to find a man who held the simple, clean position that law and decency should be consistent regardless of who was asking for them. "I love you," she said. He looked slightly surprised, which was funny given that they had been married for 8 months. "Right now particularly," he said. "Right now particularly," she said. He smiled, the one with the small gap between the front teeth. "I love you too," he said. "Right now particularly and in general." December came again, and the house was different than it had been the previous December. The spare room was William's now, containing a proper crib that Harlan had built over 3 weekends in October, carefully mortised and smooth-sanded, with a small carved horse on the headboard that had taken an additional week, and appeared one morning with the same quiet announcement as the book of poems had appeared, placed without comment and received with everything. Inez had hung the printed cotton fabric at the kitchen window, the brown flowers on cream that Harlan had bought her in Caldwell the first time, and which she had originally intended for the spare room but had ended up keeping for herself. She sat by that window in the evenings now with her mending or her reading, and the light came through the cotton in the mornings in a particular warm, diffuse way that she had come to think of as one of the specific pleasures of her daily life. There was a calmness to December that contrasted sharply with the year before, the calmness of people who have made their choices and are living in the results of them. The baby growing in her was active from early on, more active than William had been, and she and Harlan lay in bed in the cold nights with his hand on her belly, feeling the movement with the particular attentiveness of two people who find this still remarkable despite it being the second time. "This one is livelier," Harlan said one night, feeling a sharp kick that had startled even him. "This one has opinions," Inez agreed. "So did someone else I know from before she was born." "I was not born opinionated," she said. "I learned it." "I am sure," he said, in a tone that suggested he was not sure at all. She laughed and he kissed her shoulder, and William made a sound in the next room that suggested he was talking to himself in the night, which he had recently begun doing, a stream of private commentary on matters known only to himself. "He is having a conversation with someone," Harlan said. "He is a very sociable person," Inez said. "He gets it from your side." "I am not particularly sociable," Harlan said. "You are sociable with people who matter," she said. "That is the better kind." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you think?" "It is what I know," she said. He pulled her closer, carefully because of the belly, and she settled against him with the ease of two people who have learned the specific geography of each other. "Inez," he said. "I have been thinking about the house," he said. "There is going to be 4 of us come spring, and the spare room is William's now. I want to add on another room proper on the west side. I have the lumber from the stand I cleared this summer. I want to start in the spring when the ground thaws." She thought about this. "Another room, a bigger house, a house that grew with the life in it." "Yes," she said, "I want that. I also want," he paused, "I thought about a proper parlor. You have been using the main room for everything, and you have never complained about it, but I notice things." She smiled against his shoulder. "What do you notice?" "I notice that you give the best chair to anyone who visits and take the harder one yourself, and that you have not put anything of your own on the walls because you did not want to presume, and that you have been very careful to treat this house as mine and yours equally, when the truth is it is mostly yours now in every way that matters." She was quiet. "I want you to have a room that is unarguably yours," he said, "with a window that faces whatever direction you want and a chair that is the best one and your things on the walls." She had to press her lips together for a moment to keep her voice steady. "A parlor," she said finally, "and a proper curtain rod," he said, "not just a nail." She laughed. "Harlan Dunlap," she said, "you are the most unexpectedly romantic man I have ever met in my life." "I thought about a nail," he said seriously, "but a rod seemed better." She kissed him. He kissed her back, and then William's commentary in the next room reached a particularly enthusiastic pitch, and they both laughed, and the baby in her belly kicked as though registering its own opinion on the matter, and the house held them all in the cold December night with the particular warmth of a place that has been fully lived in. The second baby came at the end of April. This time there was a doctor from Caldwell. The creek was low, and the roads were good, and Harlan had been planning for this since February, with the thorough preparedness of a man who had been through it once already, and had taken detailed mental notes. The doctor was a young man named Hale who had come to Caldwell the previous fall, and whose competence Inez had already evaluated favorably through the grapevine. The labor was faster than William's had been and considerably louder. Inez, who had been composed to the point of unnerving stoicism during William's arrival, discovered that the second time around she had fewer polite inhibitions, and she said several things in the final hour that she later told Harlan were not necessarily things she would have chosen to say in front of a relative stranger, but that in the moment had seemed entirely appropriate. The baby was a boy, large and forceful, with lungs that announced his arrival in terms that reached Harlan waiting in the main room, and, if Dora Haas's later account was accurate, possibly the corral. They named him James Harlan Dunlap. Harlan, when he first held the baby, stood very still with him and looked down at the red, squirming, objecting face of his son with an expression that Inez watched carefully from the bed, still exhausted and aching and filled with a love so enormous it was almost structural, like a thing she was built into rather than simply feeling. "Hello, James," Harlan said, in his low, steady voice. "I have been looking forward to meeting you." James, apparently, had no objections to this greeting. He stopped objecting quite as loudly and focused his unfocused new eyes in the general direction of the sound, and Harlan smiled at him with the small gap between the front teeth showing, and Inez thought, there is the rest of everything, right there in that room. Summer came with James in it, and the ranch adjusted to 2 children with the cheerful chaos that attends this particular upgrade. William, who was 18 months old and had decided that the world was personally interesting and worth investigating at close range, received his brother's arrival with a mix of wariness and fascinated attention that slowly, over the weeks, resolved into a proprietary pride that expressed itself primarily by sitting very close to wherever James was placed and showing him things. Deke the cowhand, who had by this point resigned himself to the domestic abundance of the Dunlap ranch with the philosophical air of a man who has learned to work around livestock of all kinds, developed a particular soft spot for William that he would have denied strenuously if accused of it directly. But that expressed itself in small concrete ways: a carved wooden horse appearing on the porch, a fence post in the lower pasture that had been child-proofed with smooth sanding, a habit of performing his loudest tasks at a schedule that respected the baby's sleeping hours. The addition to the house was done by July, another room on the west side, as planned, with a window that faced southwest for the afternoon light, a proper curtain rod, and bookshelves that Harlan built against one wall. Inez painted the bookshelves a particular green that she found on a bolt of painted shelf paper in the general store in Caldwell, and she put her books on them and the letter from Aunt Opal on the mantelpiece, and 2 pressed wildflowers that she had collected from the ridge on a day last spring when she had walked up there alone and stood in the wind and felt entirely, completely herself. On the wall she hung a framed sketch, a view of the ridge from the house, which she had drawn herself over the course of a winter, carefully, in a sketchbook she had bought in Caldwell with the last of the $3 she had arrived with. Harlan saw it hung for the first time and stood looking at it for a long moment. "You can draw," he said. "A little," she said. "That is a good deal more than a little," he said. "That is exactly what it looks like from the kitchen window in the morning." "It is what I see every day," she said. "I wanted to put it somewhere it could stay." He looked at the sketch a moment longer, and then he looked at her, and the look said everything that the careful, economical man expressed in looks when words were not sufficient for the full weight of something. The ranch grew steadily through the following years. Harlan's Hereford program produced results that attracted attention from neighboring ranchers, and he became known as a man whose counsel on cattle breeding was worth having. Inez, whose practical intelligence and observational precision had been his first best advisor on the project, became quietly known as the reason half of his insights were actually implemented, which was a form of credit the frontier generally did not distribute to women openly, but which circulated in the honest private opinions of the people who worked with both of them. She also, in the spring of 1881, started teaching. Rosalind Bright, the schoolteacher, had become a genuine friend, and when the county school added a second room and needed someone to take the younger children, Rosalind had put Inez's name forward with a certainty that did not ask permission. Inez, when the school board approached her, had looked at Harlan, "Do you want to do it?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Then do it," he said. "We will sort the rest out." She taught Tuesday and Thursday mornings when William was old enough for school himself and James was old enough to accompany him, which was a solution that satisfied everyone including James, who was by the age of 2 an opinionated traveler who did not like being left behind. She taught reading and arithmetic, and the careful formation of letters to children who were going to need these things in a world that would not forgive them for not having them. And she did it with the same directness and the same refusal to condescend that characterized everything she did. And the children in her class learned at a rate that surprised the school board and surprised no one who actually knew her. Aunt Opal came to visit every spring. She had sold her house in Mercy Flats in the summer of 1879 and moved to a small place in Caldwell, which she had declared more convenient and which had the secondary advantage of being 7 miles from the ranch rather than 2 days by stage. She had opinions about everything and held them at full volume and was beloved by both William and James, with the particular fierce loyalty that children extend to adults who treat them as interesting people rather than small nuisances. On a morning in the spring of 1883, William 5 and James almost 4, and the ranch in full productive bloom, Inez stood on the porch in the early light and heard the creak of the door behind her, and Harlan came out and stood beside her the way he had been standing beside her for 4 years, close and steady and sure. The ridge was green in the spring light. The cattle were in the lower pasture. From the barn she could hear James enthusiastically telling Deke about something that had happened in a dream, a narration that had been going on for some time and showed no signs of concluding. Inside the house, William was at the kitchen table with a book, reading with the focused absorption he brought to everything, a quality so recognizable that it consistently made Inez smile. "What are you thinking?" Harlan asked. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I am thinking about the wheel," she said. "You always think about the wheel." "It is worth thinking about," she said. "It was my whole life that broke on that road, and I did not know it at the time. I thought it was a disaster." She felt his arm go around her. "It was the best thing that ever happened to me. The wheel breaking, she said, "and the rain and you coming down that road on that horse." "The creek flooding," he offered. "The creek flooding," she agreed. "All of it, every broken thing that put me at the side of that road." He held her. The morning moved around them. "I offered you a roof," he said. She turned to look at him. "You offered me more than that from the first minute," she said. "You just packaged it as a roof so I could say yes to it." He looked at her with that expression, the open, unguarded one he saved for the moments when being completely known by another person felt like the best possible thing in the world. "What did you offer me?" he asked. Not fishing. Genuinely asking in the direct and honest way he had always asked things. She thought about it properly. She had offered him her competence and her honesty and her opinions about cattle breeding and her ability to reorganize a pantry. She had offered him a complicated life with a dead husband in it, and a baby and $3, and no guarantee of anything. She had offered him her grief and her humor and her stubbornness and the specific difficult joy of loving someone who refuses to be smaller than they are. She had offered him herself, completely, all of it. "I offered you back a life," she said, "a real one, the kind that is worth the trouble of building." He was quiet for a moment, and the quiet was the kind that means, "Yes, that is exactly right, that is the whole of it." "You did," he said. She leaned into him. James's voice from the barn reached a new pitch of dramatic emphasis. William appeared in the doorway, book in hand, with the patient look of someone who has decided that the outdoors requires too many variables. "James is still talking," William informed them. "I know," Harlan said. "He has been talking since breakfast." "He takes after your mother," Harlan said. Inez laughed. "He does not." "He absolutely does," Harlan said. "Both of them have things to say and are going to say them, and the world is going to have to make room." William considered this. "I have things to say too," he pointed out. "I just say them once." "That is also from your mother," Harlan said. William seemed satisfied with this allocation and went back inside. Inez looked up at Harlan. He looked down at her. The morning was everywhere around them, light on the ridge, wind in the grass, the sound of James winding down in the barn, the smell of the last of the frost burning off the pasture. "You know," she said, "I never did ask you what it was that made you stop on that road." He raised an eyebrow. "The broken wheel was fairly obvious," he said. "No," she said. "I mean there were other wagons broken on other roads in that country. You did not stop for all of them. What made you stop for me?" He considered this, the unhurried way, the real way. "I do not know exactly," he said. "You were sitting in the rain and not looking sorry for yourself. You were just sitting there like the rain was something you had already decided was irrelevant to what you needed to do next. I thought that was something." He paused. "And I thought if I rode past a woman sitting in the rain on a flooded road with a busted wheel and a baby on the way, I would spend the rest of the day unable to think about anything else. So it was partly self-interest," she said. "It was mostly self-interest," he said. "It turned out to be a great deal more than I expected." "For both of us," she said. "For both of us," he agreed. She rose on her toes and kissed him, there on the porch in the spring morning, with the green ridge and the grazing cattle and James's voice finally reaching its conclusion in the barn. He kissed her back the way he did everything, completely, without hurry, with his whole attention, and she thought that this was what shelter really meant. Not a roof, not four walls and a dry barn and a spare room with a good quilt. It was this. It was a person who stood beside you in the cold and looked at the same horizon and held on. She had arrived on his road with a broken wheel and $3, and a grief she did not yet know how to carry. She had offered him nothing that looked impressive from the outside, but she had offered him everything that was true, and he had taken it with both hands, and they had built this life together out of honesty and competence, and the kind of love that does not ask you to be different from what you are. James came out of the barn at a dead run, announcing something urgent about a hen that had laid an egg in an unusual location, and Harlan went to investigate with the full seriousness the matter apparently deserved, and Inez stood on her porch in the sunlight and looked at the ridge and at the ranch, and at the man crossing the yard with her youngest son's hand in his, and she felt the full, complete, abundant weight of a life that had been built exactly right. The egg, it turned out, was behind the grain barrel. This was resolved to everyone's satisfaction within the quarter hour. James narrated the entire resolution at length. Harlan listened to all of it. William appeared in the doorway again and announced that the coffee had been ready for a long time if anyone was interested. They all came in. The door closed behind them. The Kansas morning went on, wide and green and full of light, and the ranch sat in the bend of the creek exactly as it had sat the first time Inez Donnelly rode up to it in the rain. Only now it was different in every way that mattered, full of the noise of children and the smell of coffee, and the solid, quiet, unshakable presence of a life that two people had chosen to build together, piece by piece, out of a broken wheel and a roof offered in the rain, and the far rarer, far more valuable thing that she had offered in return.